On this channel, we break down relationship dynamics in real life and on TV. Check out my playlist after this live. Tonight, we will be. I'm sorry. So, tonight, we have a special psychotherapist joining us to break down some of the do's and don'ts about therapy. If you've seen the Netflix movie Hypnotic, type one word in the chat letting us know what you thought about the movie. I am an advocate for therapy, and I've been reviewing Married at First Sight. The last two seasons, they've been pretty toxic. So, in my opinion, especially this season, when I say all the couples need individual therapy, but not the type of therapy we've witnessed in this movie, Hypnotic, on Netflix. Before we jump right in, I would like to introduce my special guest, psychotherapist, Ro, who specializes in anxiety and trauma. Hey, Ro, what were your thoughts when you saw the movie Hypnotic?
Ooh. Wow, the movie Hypnotic, it was real fascinating. Um, there were a lot of things that I noticed that were okay for it being a thriller. However, there were a lot of I would say some ethical issues throughout the movie that I noticed right at the beginning. And so that's what we're going to kind of discuss tonight.
So, one of the questions that I have is what one of the questions I have for you is what would you say you took from the movie versus what you actually do in your practice in real life?
Hmm. Okay. So there were a lot of things that I definitely do not do in my everyday practice that I witnessed in the movie. Some of those things where I guess we could kind of jump into the beginning of the movie where there were a lot of inappropriate things that I witnessed. And that includes Dr. Mead. And so there's two main characters, Dr. Mead and Jennifer. And then there's supporting cast, but it primarily focuses on the two of them. And so Dr. Mead is at his client's party. Now, his client is not Jennifer at this point. However, it's her friend, and it's their housewarming party. And that is a huge no. You definitely do not attend a client's party if they ever invite you. And if they ever do invite you to something like that, you would explore with them why they think it would be appropriate for you to attend. Now, we're not going to say that you may never run into a client in public. That might happen. For me personally, it has never happened, thankfully. And I would probably just make a beeline for the door depending on what kind of party it was. If it was just like, say, to fraternize or to network or something, I would probably just disappear. But depending on what kind of party it was, like I said, I might hang around. Now, you also want to remember how your client would view you. So I would advise not to drink any alcohol if there was alcohol provided at this party. I wouldn't do any of that. Dancing, depending on what it is, I wouldn't do anything that would have the client see you in a negative light so that they could bring that into the next session.
So, are
So
you saying that it's definitely not appropriate to take an invite from your client if they're having a personal event?
yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. You would politely decline, and like I said before, you would just explore it with them why they think that they would invite you. If they kept, asking, then you would explore it. But yeah, I would say no to that. That is definitely unethical to attend your client's party because now you're making it into a personal relationship versus a therapeutic relationship.
One thing I also did notice in the beginning is as soon as he did see his client's friend, there was something about the chemistry that he was pretty much drawn to her. And what are your thoughts about when you see a client in a public setting? Do you approach them? Do you act like you don't see them? if they do see you, what would you say is the best way to approach that situation?
Oh yeah. That was highly inappropriate. So I'm going to quote some of the lines from the movie just so the audience can understand what happened. So the quick answer to your question is no. As a therapist, you definitely do not approach your client in public. And so these are some of the lines from the movie, just so the audience can understand. And so Jennifer's back is turned. She's looking at a mother and a son, and there's going to be some spoilers in here. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, uh, I guess if you're watching this later on, just pause and watch the movie. But Jennifer is looking at a mother and a son, and she is possibly thinking about herself and her child. And the Dr. Mead calls out her name. They're in some type of mall or something, and he's like, "Hey, Jennifer." And then she turns around and says, "Hi." And he says to her, "You look as fantastic as ever." First off, that is a no. Okay. We are not going to say to a client that they look good in any capacity. You can note and like highlight certain things about your client, like, oh, I noticed that, you got your nails done, or I noticed, is that a new jacket or something? But typically you wouldn't necessarily say that, but it just depends on what kind of therapist you might be. And so he says that to her, and then he says, "I haven't seen you in a couple weeks." So that is something that we're definitely not going to do, starting with the approaching her, Jennifer, and then letting her know, like, "Hey, I haven't seen you in a couple weeks," because that's a bit intimidating. Because he also says, "You're not avoiding me, are you?" And um it just becomes a bit it places her in a situation where uh he is in a place of authority and she is not. And so he says, like, "Oh, you're avoiding me." It kind of becomes like a parent child situation. And so she might be thinking, "Oh, is there going to be some type of consequence if I do say, yeah, I've been avoiding you because for whatever reason you made me feel uncomfortable during the session. I'm just not into therapy right now." Or, funds might be tight, but I don't really want to tell my therapist right now because we don't have that kind of relationship. It really depends. So then Jennifer says, "Oh, no, I've been meaning to schedule it. I've just been really busy. Oh, and by the way, I got the job." Now, she's telling him some things that she might have said during session instead of this quick little rendezvous in public. Um, and so there's some blurred lines there.
I totally understand. I remember when they were standing there and he said that to her, and then when they had their first session. Now, like I said, I've been reviewing Married at First Sight, and a
Mm-hmm,
lot of these couples, especially this season in Houston, they
mm-hmm,
have a lot of trauma, and I know that you specialize in trauma. And with Jennifer, she came in because of her trauma with
mm-hmm.
her fiance. And like you said, there are spoilers. So if you don't want to hear the spoilers, you might want to, spoiler alert, uh, plug your ears for a second. But she came in because, she had a miscarriage. Now, how do you start a session with someone with trauma? Uh, Break it down for us, because sometimes people feel intimidated when it comes to going to therapy. So give us a few pointers as to how it's supposed to be done, because Dr. Mead jumped right in there as if he already knew her instead of being curious and asking her certain questions.
Oh, yeah, that is so true. Since we're going back to the inappropriate relationship at the beginning with him being at her friend's party, he already knows her a little bit more on a personal level. So he met her fiance. So he hops right in and he says, "Tell me about Brian," which as a therapist, I would never know about my client's partner from the jump unless it was couples therapy and I had both of them before me. Then if it was an individual session, the client would just start to tell me about their partner, possibly, if that's what every therapist does it differently. Some people might do a quick phone consultation just to briefly understand why the client may be coming in. They might do and then you can learn more about the client at intake, and if that is their presenting problem, so the reason why they decide to come in, then that is where it might be appropriate to ask the client, okay, tell me about this event that took place in your life. But I wouldn't just go in and just say, tell me about Brian, because did she say that that's why she was there? She was just exploring this therapy as just like, all right, my friend told me to go. She scheduled some, first of all, her friend scheduled this appointment for her. So did she even want to be there? We don't know. Um, so, we would just ask the client, all right, so why are you here? What is the event that took place in your life? What are some things that you've done to cope with it since it's occurred? Some people have trauma from childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, or it could be as recent as it took place yesterday. So you would just ask them about those periods of time. And if it happened, like more recent than within the month and things, you would just ask how they have been coping with it, and you guys start working on some new tools. But Dr. Mead, he comes off as someone who is just dictating to her what is going to happen. He suggests, now we're going to go into the hypnotherapy. He suggests hypnotherapy to her. He asks her if she's ever tried it before, and she says no, that she's never tried it. And then, he's like, okay, which is understandable. Obviously, there's so many different types of modalities out there. Sometimes I suggest the modalities that I use with my clients. I ask them if they've ever heard of it or utilized it before, and they say no. And then I just let them know what it's like, and then we try it out together, and then I just ask them how was that for them, and then they give me some feedback. But what Dr. Mead is doing is not how I typically know therapists to conduct therapy.
Great answers. Thank you for that advice. That advice. Now, what would you tell someone who is hesitant about therapy? What are some things that would be helpful in getting therapy? Because, like you said, there are a lot of people with trauma, whether it be from childhood or current trauma in their adulthood. What are some ways that you can encourage our listeners to understand how important therapy is to pretty much everyone? I think everyone could actually benefit from therapy, and there's different times in everyone's life that is difficult and they need someone to talk to. So what are some pointers that you can give to our listeners to you know consider therapy?
Mm-hmm. What I typically tell people is that uh, therapy can be and is for everyone. A lot of people think that they have to go through a horrific event to attend therapy, but it can just be like a check in. A lot of people don't view it that way, but when I put it into those words, they kind of understand what I mean. So you go to your doctor yearly, sometimes twice a year, just for a checkup. And if you're, typically totally healthy, we'll put that in quotes. And the same thing can happen with therapy. It doesn't need to be a horrific event to attend therapy. You can go to just like, hey, some things are changing in my life and I just need to talk about it. We are always changing. We're entering into different stages and phases that can include transitioning between schools, transitioning between careers, different jobs within that career, experiencing loss. And with loss, sometimes people view loss as only a death, but it can be a death. It can also be losing a job, losing a relationship. There's many things that you can lose throughout your life. It could be losing your home, items within your home. And so it's very important to emphasize that when you talk about therapy and encouraging others to seek help, because we all experience pain throughout our life, and it's okay to talk to someone about it in a place where you should feel safe, where your therapist should not be judging you, where you're not going to be told what to do, where sometimes the people that we love, where they mean well, but sometimes they can kind of just tell us, well, just feel better, just put a smile on your face, just get over it, where they're not meaning to harm you, but those words can be harmful. So when you go to a therapist, they can help you to recognize and to heal from some of those things that you may have experienced.
Awesome. Thank you for that information. Now, from a coach perspective and a therapist perspective, I know I've coached clients, especially clients who are in relationships, whether it be a long term relationship or a marriage versus therapy. Sometimes people are not sure whether they should seek out a coach or a therapist. Can you give us some insight as to what the difference is between a coach and a therapist? Um, for me, I coach people and help them in the situations that they are currently in. I don't necessarily go back into their childhood traumas or stuff like that, but how about give us a little bit about what the difference is between a coach and a therapist.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one and saying that as a coach, you don't go into someone's like history back in childhood. And so that's typically what I delve into. All therapists do not go into certain clients' history that in depth. However, I do. My particular training starts with, infancy and can go back generations. And so we definitely explore that so we can understand the whole person. We don't want to just focus on the right now, because right now is impacted by all the things that I mentioned before. So infancy, adolescence, early young adulthood. And so all of that influences who you are today. And so that's what we like to work on. Along with those traumas that I mentioned before, those are things that you, as a coach, necessarily wouldn't go into, because there can be such a thing as complex trauma. And that would be a place where, like, would you say you would know what to do with those, with a complex trauma if a client came in for you?
Well, the thing is, I do have a background in trauma, but what I
Mm-hmm.
do within my coaching practice, I like to stay on topic with my clients and
Mm-hmm.
help them to work through what it is that they are coming in for. So if it's financial issues or infidelity or even just trying to transition, like you said, there are different transitions in life when it comes to getting married, having a new baby, you know, preparing your child for school and stuff like that. There are different transitions where I feel like coaches can help to facilitate and guide you through that. But if you're trying to heal wounds, I think that's when I would recommend for someone to see a therapist. From your professional standpoint, would you say that someone can see a coach and a therapist at the same time?
Yeah, I would say you could definitely see a coach and a therapist. Sometimes I do refer my clients to coaches because what we're discussing is more of a right now and coach issue, where sometimes they just need a little bit more motivation. And so that would sometimes be more appropriate for a coach. Mhm.
Okay. And like I said, I've been reviewing Married at First Sight, and there is a particular girl. Her name is Michaela. She's one of the partners in the marriages, who has been saying that she's feeling abandoned because her father unfortunately passed away in a car accident. And I know you touched upon grief earlier on. Would you say that abandonment and grief kind of go hand in hand, or would a lot of people on the internet are feeling like she's using that as an excuse to cover up bad behavior? What would you say about that?
I would say it depends on the individual. They can go hand in hand depending going going back to that childhood, depending on that childhood experience, along with attachment. So it depends on what type of attachment she has. And
Mhm.
now I am not 100% familiar on her attachment. I don't has she touched on it in the show? I'm not sure.
No,
Um,
I mean, she's just been really um acting out, and when she doesn't get what she wants, it seems though as though she is very explosive, and
mhm,
some people are I feel like some people are misinterpreting her explosions because, as I said, I do have a trauma background, some trauma training,
mhm,
and I do see that there are some unresolved issues that she may need to see a therapist for,
mhm,
but she's channeling her anger towards her current husband, which is like very explosive and
mhm.
um unfortunate at times.
Yeah, yeah. And I do remember that the early episodes of the show and her expressing that she did feel abandoned by her dad. And that is something that, like I said, it can go hand in hand, but also like I said, it can depend on the individual. But if I can recall with her, she was very close to her father. And so when he did die, this did heavily impact her, where she did feel abandoned. So with her husband taking off, as I remember in the early episodes with her husband, like she got mad at him and then he just took off. Um she did feel abandoned all over again. So they can go hand in hand. But then when we kind of go back to Hypnotic here, uh I'm not sure if there was some abandonment in there between Jennifer and Brian. They felt like they weren't communicating effectively, and that was the result of their breakup from their engagement. Correct?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I gathered from it because I remember her saying while he was laying in the hospital bed that she apologizes for shutting him out and not feeling like he was grieving, because sometimes there is a misconception that when a woman has a miscarriage that the male isn't grieving just as much as the woman is grieving, and I think that is a conversation that either the couple should have together or have with a third party, meaning, a coach or a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And I have one last question for you. So, I know in the movie, Dr. Mead kept saying, "Trust me, Jennifer, trust me,
Mm,
Jennifer."
yeah.
Would you say that as a therapist, you would advise your clients to trust all of the advice that you give them?
and so I would say that I don't particularly give my clients advice. We work on things together. So I always like to let my clients know that it is a collaborative experience, that it's never just going to be what I say. And obviously, they're seeking therapy for a reason. Um, and so I wouldn't say for them to put all of their trust in me, because everything that I say is not the holy grail. And that's where that power dynamic that I was talking about before comes into play. As the therapist, it's my responsibility and other therapists' responsibility to recognize that power dynamic between the therapist and the client. Because sometimes the client may put the therapist on a pedestal and think that everything that they say they should do. And that is not the case. And throughout the movie, Dr. Mead continuously tells Jennifer, even when you start to notice her facial expressions, her body expressions, which are things as a therapist you take note of, you observe. And she would say no, either verbally, or she might express it and look a little tense, like put her shoulders up, like, I don't know about that. And he would continuously say to her, just trust me, Jennifer, trust me. Obviously, this is theatrics, and he's doing this for the sake of the storyline in the movie. However, there can be possibly some therapists out there who may do that, and it's good for clients to know that that's not something that should be happening within their therapeutic relationship. Mhm. And
Okay.
something else that I forgot to mention before, when Dr. Mead and Jennifer ran into each other at the mall, he ends up asking her on a coffee date. So when she says that she got the job, he's like, "Oh, so can I take you out for a celebratory coffee?" And she's like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Oh, come on." And then next scene, they're having coffee together and it becomes much more personal. So now we have some more ethical issues where um first he shouldn't be calling her out in public, and then he is asking her out, obviously, like, this doesn't need to be a romantic date, but he's still asking her on some type of hangout. And they start talking about his personal life. She starts to like analyze him and just like, "Oh, you seem like this kind of person." And then he says, "Okay, I'll play. Actually, I'm 46. I'm an only child. I was married once to the love of my life, Amy. We were happy, but she died." Totally inappropriate, because I wanted to take note of this, because with him divulging all of that information to her, he is now putting his issues and his possible trauma onto her for her to carry. So now she's going to remember that possibly in session, and if she experienced a death, as we talked about, she did, and that's something that she mentioned to him with her miscarriage, now she may not want to necessarily bring that up to him. Or if she's experienced any other deaths, because she's like, "Oh, well, he's experienced the death of his wife, so whatever I have may be insignificant." And that's never what we want to experience in the therapeutic relationship. We want the client to freely express whatever they're going through. So Dr. Mead saying that to her on inappropriate coffee date should not have happened.
Yeah, I thought that was definitely inappropriate as well. I do see a comment saying it's hard to trust strangers. How would you say people who are hesitant about therapy, how would you say, what are some pointers that would help them to build a healthy client therapist relationship?
Mm. Okay. To create that, so it happens, sometimes it can happen pretty quickly where people are pretty trusting of their therapists, but I have had clients who have a guard, or sometimes people might call it a wall, and that's okay. And it's the therapist's responsibility to meet the client where they're at. So that just means if the client comes in and they're not really talking to you and they're just like, I don't know you. I don't know if we should talk about this. I don't feel comfortable." Then you just kind of chip away little by little. We don't need to talk about every last thing in the first session, the second session, the third session. We can go at the pace of the client, because there's a reason why they're there. They sought you out. They're coming to see you because they want to work on something. So you go at their own pace. You don't want to make them feel uncomfortable, because there could be other people in their life who have made them feel uncomfortable previously, and they want to go slowly, possibly, so they could see if they can trust you. And also, when we go back to that abandonment that we talked about, are you going to abandon them because you don't like their personality? You're going to say, "Oh, this ain't it. You got to go. Bye." Or are you going to stick with them? Once they see that you're not going to abandon them, then maybe they might stick around and like, "Okay, I feel like I can trust this person." So it's all about building that rapport with the client.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And I always tell people, as I said in the beginning, I am an advocate for therapy.
Mhm.
And just because you go to one therapist and you may not have the
Mm.
greatest experience, don't give up. It's just like going to Old Navy and trying on different jeans. Like, there's going to be a pair of jeans that you love and that you'll stick with and you'll probably wear for the next 10 years. So I definitely appreciate all of your advice. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up tonight?
Yeah, I have to agree with what you just said regarding therapists. So for me, I always let my clients know up front, this is about you. This isn't about me, as we previously talked about with Dr. Mead. Like, not sharing that information about myself. This is about you, the client. And so wherever your journey takes you, don't be afraid if you're with a therapist, if you feel uncomfortable with them, to let your therapist know. If your therapist is offended, then that's about them. That has nothing to do with you. I always let my clients know up front, like, hey, if you feel like this isn't working between us, I will gladly help you to find another therapist that can help you on your journey, because this is about you. So, like you were saying, coach, it is important for that client to know that this therapist isn't the end all be all. There's so many different types of therapists, in different disciplines, where, and using different modalities where they can help all, where all of these different types of therapists can help you. And so exploring that, and seeing what that can look like for you.
Okay. And what would you say is, because I feel like there is a fine line between being relatable and also not oversharing. Um, as I
Mhm.
said, I've had some trauma training, so when I've spoken to some clients, I don't reveal my full life story, but I do try to put them in a position to help them to understand they are not alone. And even
Mhm.
though I am sitting in the quote unquote professional seat, I've also lived life, and there's been things happening in my own personal life that kind of mirrors, or I guess kind of I can relate to. What would you say about that?
Yeah, that definitely happens. I have many clients who come in with similar experiences to mine throughout my life. And that's where your training comes in. That's where you need to pull back on your training and remember, this is not the time for you to, start crying, to say, I totally get you. Like, you can do that. Now, there's going to be moments where a therapist may shed a tear or fully cry, but that, for me, I personally have not experienced like a full cry out. And now there are appropriate times to disclose, and it's called disclosing when a therapist decides to share something with a client. And you would say, everyone has different ways of disclosing things to their clients. And so, for me, if I've experienced something and the client is, as I said before, guarded, I would let them know that, like, yeah, I've experienced something similar, or I understand what you're going through because I too have experienced something similar. I don't necessarily tell them all of the details of what exactly occurred, for me, but I just let them know that they're not alone and that I can get what they have been through. And sometimes that like breaks down that wall and they feel a little bit more connected to me because they view me a little bit more as a human being.
Mhm.
Um, and so I would say that it's definitely different, but telling a client all about you, that's blurring some boundaries, which were called like diffuse boundaries, or, in layman's terms, just non-existent boundaries. And that's not what we're looking for. We need some clear boundaries and letting them know, like, hey, I'm not, like I said before, this isn't about me. We're not talking about me. This is about you. We're only going to be talking about you. So, as if your therapist is talking about themselves all throughout the session, then that ain't the therapist for you, and you guys to move on. That's all I gotta
Well, thank you
say.
so much. I mean, I think sometimes we all need a little help. I mean, I do believe therapists should have therapists. You know, we
Oh,
all have our own
definitely.
issues.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I definitely appreciate all of your feedback, your expertise. Um, if anyone has any questions, we'll take a few questions in the comments. If not, I would like to thank you, Miss Therapist Rowe. I greatly appreciate all of your feedback and your points and your tips and the definite do's and don'ts of what therapy should look like. And I hope we can do this again. I am looking through the comments, and I see someone is saying, like you said, definitely red flag, asking for a coffee date. That was very inappropriate.
Mhm.
And I see a lot of comments saying it's definitely about the client. I think in many professions, especially in a profession where you're helping people get through their trauma. You have to always remember it's about that person, even if you get triggered by what they are saying to you. You just have to continue to stay present, be in the moment, and let that person tell tell you what they need to tell you so they can get through that session.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. And like you said, I hope that we get to do this again in the future.
Definitely. All right, everyone. Have a great Saturday evening, and we will see you at another time. Until next time, I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.
Bye.